Welcome to this week's video tutorial with Virtual Racing School for the Porsche iRacing Cup. This week the series visits Sebring International Raceway, where I shall be dissecting a lap from Rens Broekman. The lap is driven on race fuel in default morning weather. As usual, I'll play the lap through first in full before then going into further analysis. Okay, so that was a 2-minute 02.667. So from the list of data packs on the VRS website, choose the Porsche as driven by Rens Broekman, and we're going to choose week 1 at Sebring, which will load the session details where you can download lap data, the replay and the setup of course. And we're just going to click on Learn Track, which is going to load up the analyzer. It's going to play the lap through. We're going to pause it, and just to summarize what we're seeing a telemetry trace of the steering angle across the duration of the lap, as well as speed and brake and throttle inputs, as well as some live steering and brake and throttle inputs as well. And VRS auto generates the lap into sectors. So we're going to select the first sector, which is the run from the start finish line to the braking zone for turn 1, and just want to bring the car gradually over to the right hand pit wall, where you want to think about your braking zone into turn 1, which is going to be just after the bridge. So we'll go to sector 2 for that. Braking quite hard initially, but it's a very, very fast corner, so bleeding off those brakes gradually as he's turning in, carrying a nice wide arc through the corner, so braking hard, turning in gradually and progressively. Yeah, so a nice wide arc following this yellow painted line, still braking, and then picking up the throttle just before the apex, which is marked by this orange cone in the fencing, which will be the tightest point for the car through this corner. So we're quite heavily on the throttle now, so Rens is picking up the throttle quite aggressively, and the reason for that is, you'll see this throughout any of the Porsche laps, is to get straight to the limit of traction as quickly as possible so the car doesn't understeer. You're taking the load off the front tyres as soon as you get onto the throttle, but by going right on the limit of traction straight away, you allow the car to continue to rotate. So through the exit, opening the car up and gradually getting more and more throttle, waiting for the car to settle. Once the car's settled, your steering should be fully straight and you should be on full throttle. And then towards the exit of the corner, just bring the car back over to the middle of the circuit just to set the car up for a nice straight braking zone into turn 2 or turn 3, depending on how you look at it, which is going to be just before the cones on the right hand side here, where you're going to be braking quite hard. Sustain that braking, turn in just about where the final cone appears and hugging the inside curb, more so as you apex quite late. So we'll just show you that. So you get closer and closer to the curb and then eventually picking up for quite a late apex there, just as the curb sticks out the most. Try and avoid actually making contact with it if you can. It's quite abrupt, so it will upset the balance of the car. And also try and pick up the throttle just before you apex and then be quite progressive as the car straightens out, before then lifting again as you aim for this second apex on the right hand side, which is again is quite abrupt. So just lifting out of the throttle in anticipation of clipping it there, which Rens does just clip it slightly, before then getting back onto the throttle and keeping the car over to the right hand side where you've got this entry curb on the right again for the right hander of turn 5. So we get a sector 4 for this one, where you just want to brake quite briefly, and again very late apex here. We've got a very long straight or a very long period of full throttle after this, so holding those brakes on, slowing the car down, gradually getting closer and closer. And notice how Rens picks up the throttle before he actually apexes. So we still haven't apexed, but Rens is already quite hard on the throttle. Just modulating the throttle, not quite at full throttle, clipping our apex there. Get close to the curb, but don't touch that curb. That's very important, otherwise that will upset the car big time. Open the steering, straighten the steering, get to full throttle before the exit curb. Slight correction we can see in the steering trace for oversteer there. And again, this curb is quite bumpy on the exit, just be aware of that. And then hug the right hand edge of the circuit down towards the hairpin, where you can gradually bring the car back over to the left hand side in anticipation for the braking zone into the hairpin, which is going to be quite considerably before these cones on the left hand side. The Porsche has quite long braking zones, very little downforce, so braking quite hard, sustain that braking and turning in quite late, not turning until the change of tarmac into concrete actually, and you've also got this entry curb on the left. So just as that appears, you want to turn in, slow the car right down, brake all the way into the apex, bleeding off, but holding those brakes into the apex, picking up the throttle again quite quickly to 50% before then being much more progressive and gradual as you reach full throttle, opening the steering up, straightening the car up, and for the best possible exit there. Go to sector 6, which is of course easily flat out. Just carry the shortest distance, hug that curb on the right there, bring the car back over to the left, hug the curb on the left here to have a nice straight line on the brakes into the right hander of turn 10. You want to be braking just before the cones, brake hard, sustain those brakes, and then turn in quite late just after the final cone. Bleed off the brakes, not entirely. Rens is actually back on the brakes there, just into the apex, just to tuck the nose in, keep the front end loads up. And you'll notice that relatively speaking on the exit he's quite progressive and gentle with the throttle, and that's so that he can keep a nice tight line on the exit. So he's not using all of the track on the exit here, and that's to open the entry for the left-hander up, which allows him to almost be flat out through there. So has a small lift through the first apex on the left here, but then full throttle from here on out. We'll go to sector 8, which is also full throttle, just the run down towards the braking zone into tower turn 13, where you want to get close to this curb on the right but not fully, and then where the curb sticks out the most, just go to sector 9, that's when you want to start braking. So not braking too aggressively for this one, because you're going to be turning ever so slightly in anticipation for the turning point. You're obviously aimed quite far over to the outside of the circuit as you approach this corner. We'll just take that back out again. So yeah, we're aimed for the 2 cones, and then we're turning in ever so slightly before then reaching the widest point on the circuit at where the 1 cone or the single cone is. So that's the widest entry, and then bleeding off, but holding those brakes into the apex and picking up the throttle nicely at the apex. Modulating, waiting for the car to settle to full throttle there, just a fraction too early, which is why we've got this oversteer just on the exit, which we can see there, but keeps it nicely on the track, doesn't allow any wheels to be dropped into the gravel there, which is good. Gradually allow the car to come over to the right hand side, clip the curb on the left there, and then again as you approach the second curb, which is also quite flat, so you can use a lot of that, but notice how Rens is off the throttle entirely before he reaches that, and he's just teasing the brakes through here just to keep the nose loaded up. You never want to be coasting in this car. The moment that you're coasting is when the car is understeering, so you keep the nose loaded up whenever possible, just teasing the brakes, and once the car's straight, gradually get on those brakes nice and hard, aiming for this final cone, and then turning into the right hander the first part of turn 15, and holding those brakes all the way into the apex. So still braking about 30-40% here, and picking up quite a late throttle application, using lots of curb here. But notice how Rens is not dropping any wheels over the inside edge. That's quite important, because it can hook the car in and upset the car. And again, he's quite patient with the throttle, so picks up the throttle quite quickly, but then is patient before reaching full throttle once the car is nice and straight. Bring the car back over to the left again, using the curb on the left, and then braking just as this curb on the left ends, which puts him onto the concrete area, which is going to set himself up nicely for the right-hander, so he has a nice wide entry. So actually braking on the concrete there briefly, turning in, and then you want to spot your timing for this right-hander is absolutely crucial, because you've got such a long straight. You've got Ullman straight after this, which is very important, where you need to be on the throttle nice and early. So picking up the throttle just before the apex there, using this curb, again being careful not to drop any wheels just over the edge, pretty close there, and then as the car lands, reaching full throttle and taking full advantage of the flat curbing on the left down the straight. Keep the car over to the left, relax a bit, think about your braking zone into the final corner, where many lines do work, but the line that Rens chooses to take is quite a tight one, so quite economical in terms of distance covered. So we'll just take it through to sector 12, where Rens brakes hard initially, but notice how he's bleeding off more and more and more as he's getting closer to the apex. So we'll just play that through. So turning in quite early, aiming for that first wall, which I guess is going to be our first apex. Continuing to slow the car down gradually, continuing to tighten the steering gradually, spotting our second apex, so inside this yellow painted line. Just play it through, and then picking up the throttle as the car gets really close to the wall here actually. So this is almost our third apex. Picking up the throttle, hesitating over the bumps, some nasty bumps there, and then reaching full throttle before our final apex, which is before the grass here on the right, and well before that cone. Opening the steering up, anticipating some oversteer there, and using all of the track. So if you're going to be that early on throttle, you need to anticipate that the car is going to be grip limited, so you need to open the steering up and use all of the track to allow yourself to carry as much speed as possible across the start finish line to end the lap. You can find qualifying and race setups, telemetry and replays over at virtualracingschool.com, where you can also book one-to-one tuition with myself and top drivers from the likes of Commander Sibsport. Good luck for this week, and feel free to post any questions or comments below. Thanks for watching.